Malyssa.
Oh, hey, Kurt. Let's talk.
How are you?
We've been chatting on the mic for like 5 minutes already.
Oh, behind the scenes. We are on the mic. We can hear each other. We can also see each other, which is new.
It's so exciting.
We are using technology to our advantage, and it's working really well. Your mouth moving and me hearing you are synced up.
Yeah. Welcome to FaceTime, Kurt, and your new iPhone.
This is great. Thank you, I guess. I'm still, how I've been giving you the updates on how I feel about my new iPhone.
Yep.
Some things I really enjoy. Some things, specifically the autocorrect, I do not.
It gets more intuitive with time. Otherwise, you can also go in and edit it yourself.
Okay, well, I might have to work on that because it's not good right now. It's not good.
Well, I'm sorry.
So I'm really enjoying being able to see my backdrop.
I know your backdrop
my
is really
bookshelf
great. Yeah.
And equipment and stuff.
And mine is some blinds and our Christmas lights that stay up all year round. Because today I decided to leave my bed for the recording because I just wanted to be on the first floor of my house because it's warmer. Also, I just baked a chocolate cake before we got on mic, so my first floor smells really nice. I'm just sitting on the floor in my living room. I'm basically just going to find a different place to record every week. Okay. And just take you on a tour of my house, even though you've been here.
I'm not opposed to that. I'm really looking forward to the bathroom episodes.
Ooh, the bathroom is my bathroom is very warm because our first floor powder room is very small. So I'll just go in there and sit on the toilet and set this mic up on our tiny sink.
Maybe not. Well,
no, it definitely wouldn't balance.
How was your week? Did anything fun or exciting happen?
No, I don't think so. I'm trying to recollect if I've done literally anything. I mean, I've been alone for a while now. Both my roommates are gone, so I've just been in my house quietly by myself. I watched a lot of Tidying Up with Marie Kondo. I thought this morning I would wake up and want to go through all my stuff, but then I remembered that I hadn't shoveled completely last night, so I had to go out and shovel this morning, and then that took all energy to tidy up and fix my life. So
have I told you before that in Ashwaubenon they shovel the walks for us?
Have you bragged about that to me twice now in 24 hours? Yes, you have.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to make sure I mentioned it.
And the worst part is that we own a snowblower, but I don't know how to operate a snowblower, and I'm sure that I could call my father, who would happily show me how to operate the snowblower. But I feel in the time that it would take me to get my dad to teach me how to use the snowblower, I could have just shoveled. So I just shoveled. Plus, I was out there at 9 o'clock this morning, so it was nice and quiet, and there wasn't anyone to judge me. So that is an impressive amount of logic on your end. Thank you. Thank you. I worked smarter, not harder.
Amen. Amen to that.
What did you do with your week?
I have been just trying to catch up from being out of the country and finishing books. And one book I finished, I got corrections, and that's already done and out. And I'm working on my first nonfiction book, which is as fun as it sounds. So
what is it about?
It's called Successful Leaders Aren't Bullies, and it's just all about bullying in workplace environments. So it's a self-help professional development type. It's not a manual, but it's one step shy of being a manual. So what I do like about nonfiction is it goes a lot faster.
Well, that's good.
When I don't have to stop to redo character voices or remember what people sound like in my head, or have to really emote as a character, it goes pretty quickly. I don't want to make it sound like there's no emoting in nonfiction because you do have to sound like you care. But it's been a really interesting experience, and it is it goes by faster. I'm getting more pages done each day than I do with fiction. So. Nice. Learning experience. I am enjoying parts of it, and other parts of it are hooey. All those things that I said take more time are also things that I enjoy. So I miss them, but also this ain't bad. And somebody else is they're paying me to do the narration, and somebody else is going to do all the editing. So
which is the best deal.
I am so on board. Every time I get a little bit frustrated with it, I'm just remember at the end of this, all you're going to do is send it to someone else.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's their problem.
And then your life is beautiful.
Yeah, I love that part. So that's really all I've been doing is just a lot of work, a lot of time in the booth. So
yeah.
John and I had date night last night. So
did you get the ravioli, by the way?
We did not go to that restaurant.
Oh.
Needed a reservation.
Oh.
So we wound up somewhere else. And you know what? I had watched earlier in the day a Bon Appetit video of Carla making a smash burger. And so I was just really craving a burger. And so we just went to a burger place and I had a really good burger.
Nice.
And I was satisfied. And I had a brioche bun and everything, just like the one she made on the Bon Appetit YouTube channel. Have we talked about the Bon Appetit YouTube channel on the podcast?
I feel like this is a thing that happened like in our ridiculous long break. Kurt and I are now very into the Bon Appetit YouTube channel. It all started because I got Kurt into the Bon Appetit gourmet makes videos with like everyone's like, it's very viral now. So a lot of people are watching it, which like it's fine. Like I don't want to say that like we were like early adopters, but like I've been watching for a while because I don't even remember what the first one that I watched was because I am who I am. But yeah, I think it was probably Skittles. But her name is Claire and she makes gourmet stuff. And then once you start watching those, then you also will you'll get into Brad because he like inserts himself in there. And then you start watching Claire's. After that, you start watching Carla. And then you just like to watch nice people make food. And they're very they work for Bon Appetit, which seems like a very unapproachable brand. But so they're just very real people. It's really like the working man's cooking magazine. Truly. Yeah. But they make fancy stuff, but they're like, don't be intimidated by this fancy thing. It only has 6 ingredients and 72 steps. Yeah. So it's like, oh, okay. Like your idea of simple is different than mine. If we were to suggest to our listeners what episode of Gourmet Makes they should start with, what would you say is the best episode? Oreo. Really? Yes. 100%. Okay. Start with the Oreo. Okay. See, I really like Cheetos. I feel like Cheetos is a good intro. That was a super passive aggressive list of okays. Well, maybe because it's like with Doctor Who, where your doctor, like your first doctor is your favorite doctor, and so because Oreo is like one of your first Bon Appetit video, like that's like your favorite. But I feel like Cheetos really like takes you how intense into the process she gets, like how exact she is attempting to be. For me, though, it was too angsty. The Cheeto episode was too angsty. There was too much. What I love about Oreo is there was some trial and error, but she was really excited by the success she was having. So it was a lot of fun to watch. Also, how's everybody enjoying this episode of a podcast about forensics so far? Yeah, especially people who we were just talking. Okay, let's transition into this weekend because I got to meet Lori, who is the new coach at Oshkosh North, and she came up to me and was like, "Hey, I heard you have a podcast," so I got to talk to her about the podcast. So hopefully, she's listening. And I did warn her. I was like, the episodes start with Kurt and I just like chatting at each other. So, now that we've recommended to you all to go watch some Bon Appetit videos, now you can also hear us talk about forensics. So we got to be at Oshkosh North together this weekend. Another weekend of us being together, which I love. With the hand gesture. Yes, the hand gesture, which looks really crazy over FaceTime because I'm trying to move my hand as fast as possible. But and then I got to have former students judging for me as well, which was delightful. It was fun for me too. Yeah. I got to haze them a little bit. Yep, which I love. I let anyone haze my kids. They all need to be broken in. But yeah, it was a lot of schools' first tournament out, especially for like the Fox River Valley area. It was the first tournament of the year up there. So it was just nice to see all sorts of people for the first time. The Wapaka. Agreed. Who did you see this week for the first time? Good. Mark from Wapaka, seeing the Trosses who were actually judging for me. Who else did we see for the first time this weekend? I don't really know. I mean, those are my main like friends. I saw Rebecca from Appleton Paul. West. Oh yeah, Rebecca, and then Paul and Carter from Appleton East. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it was kind of a totally different crowd all the way up there. Yeah. which is good.
But I also did get to see Shelly Utke, aka Michelle Utek, who brought her team up to Oshkosh after hosting last week. And can we do a sidebar real quick and talk about the email that she sent out? Did you see this?
No.
Okay. Oh yeah, because Ben does your SpeechWire stuff, right?
Yeah.
So through SpeechWire, she sent out a follow-up email to the coaches who attended the tournament. I have not taken myself off that Sheboygan North account yet, so I do still see those emails, which it's great for me because I get all the updates. But she was addressing some judging concerns that happened at Port Washington, and it was so well done and very like I could tell she was probably holding herself back, because when you're in a coach mode and you're like mama coach mode, your kids get bad comments and critiques, she was very measured, and she used three specific examples that her kids got on their own critiques. So it was like, here's a problem, I want to address it, here's some specific examples, and please everybody talk about this with your judges.
Yeah. Which
clearly Ben Kroll made a point of talking to you about it.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Ben.
So as a listener of this podcast,
small shade.
He just heard. Yeah, he just got a little bit of shade thrown at him.
Just a tiny bit. Just like a little.
But okay, so then let's use this opportunity to have that conversation, because I think it is one that's important to have. Like, first week of competition of the year, we're already seeing judges who are saying discouraging things to teenagers. Let's remember, everybody, rule number one. Be nice to kids.
That's what we're here for, is to be nice to them.
Yes. So kudos to Michelle Utek for handling that, I thought, very well. And it was nice to get to actually talk to her a little bit this week, because she wasn't running a tournament. So shout out to her. And she did text me after the award ceremony that apparently Michelle Utek is catching on with her kids. So sorry, not sorry.
We never apologize.
No, I love tiny little inside jokes that make no sense to anybody else.
Oh yeah, we just did one before this.
Yeah,
I'm gonna stay her.
Which it really should be an inside joke for anybody who was at that nationals, but
it's true. But
does anybody else hold on to nuggets like that?
No, just us.
No, just us. I'm gonna stay her. So yes. Now, Lori, is that? Do you confirm that that's her name?
Yes.
Okay, yes. Good. I couldn't, when we talked about it at the tournament, I was like, I think that's what she said her name was. I couldn't remember. I'm so glad you confirmed that. So Welcome, Lori, into the fold. Good job hosting your first tournament. I had a lovely time.
Yes. Thank you for letting us use your microwave.
Yes. And thank you for that. Because Malyssa is a very rude vegan who requires special dietary items. I'm trying to think of notable things from the tournament that are worth talking about. The only thing I really have, I have a bone to pick with, or I did really, was having to judge a final round of play acting when there were only 5 play actings in the whole day. I was so certain I wouldn't have to judge a final round because there was only one section and there were 5 of them. I was so certain. And then we ended up doing a final round of 3. That being said, having seen the 3 and seeing how evenly matched they were, it is entirely possible that all 3 of those teams had the exact same scores throughout the day.
Yeah.
Because it really was it could have been any one of them in first place.
Yeah. I watched play acting prelims, and so I was really excited to talk to you about it. But then when I got out of my final round, you had already bounced.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm taking advantage of the fact that I don't have a team and I don't have to be on a bus. And I was done.
You could have stayed for friendship.
Girl. Why would I do that?
I wanted to talk to you about it.
Well, we can talk about it now. I knew I'd be talking to you this very next day.
No, it's fine. It's fine.
It's fine, really. It's okay.
It's totally
fine.
cool. It's chill.
I mean, we literally like live chatted RuPaul's Drag Race last night, so don't act like I bounced on you and then you didn't hear from me for a month.
I know. It's fine. It's fine.
Yeah. No, so I will happily talk more specific play acting critiques with you off mic, because that's not what we're here to do.
No.
That's what I was there to do yesterday, was judge kids and give critiques, but that's not what we're here to do. So like I said, that was really the one notable thing that I was like so certain I wasn't going to have a final round. And then I did, but then it happened and I was like, okay, I could see how these kids could have the exact same scores, because they were just so evenly matched. So yeah. You got to judge like what ended up being one thing all day. Is that
I
correct?
judged the first round of play acting, and then my round 2 got taken away from me, and then I had third round already off, so I just sat around for a lot of hours, and then I judged the group interp final.
Oh, you did? Oh, good.
I did.
Okay, excellent. That could be fun.
I mean, it can be fun. Here's my thing about group interp is that I have a very specific preference in group interp. Like, I really do. And part of that comes from me being a rebel and always loving when people are pushing the boundaries of a category. And so when people are just what I would call floating, where they're just like doing all the same things that have always worked for everyone, and they're not doing anything in their performance that pushes any boundaries and doesn't show anything new, I find that really boring. And I will use it as a method to break up performances where they're pretty like evenly matched, but another group will be doing something more interesting. And I'll say, okay, the group that's more interesting, I want to reward that. I'm going to give you the 1 versus the 2. And I learned yesterday that the other judges in my group interp did not agree with that. They liked the stuff that was the same, which is fine. I really, because the best thing I saw yesterday was the group that I gave the group interp my 1-2, which happens to be the girls from Sheboygan North. The piece that they're doing this year is so interesting. They're doing really cool stuff with using their binders for very particular sound effects, and the way that they cut their selection is really good, and the way that they use platform movement to not only move the piece forward but set the actual scene of the piece up is just so cool. Like, very rarely are people doing group interps that are necessarily stories that have settings, but this entire piece takes place in a particular like building, and it's sort of like spooky, but they build the actual environment within their platform movement, and so you are there with them, and I just thought that was so cool. And
yay.
I gave them my 1 because they're doing very cool, interesting things. I just like punched something off to the side over here. So yeah, the thing for me with group interp is that there are some people who just like to do the same things and the things that are expected, but I'm always going to reward the people who are trying something different.
They will be so happy to hear that. I hope they listen to this, because they found me at the tournament yesterday, and I've worked with these girls for the last 2 years and did a lot of their blocking with them. And they were so proud to come and tell me that they did all their own blocking themselves this year, and that they thought it was good, and that they were excited about it. So I'm so excited. And I'm also really excited to hear that they're using some of the stuff that we've used in the past, that they're like repurposing it and making it their own. And like, that's what it's supposed to be, right? And they're seniors now. So like by this stage, they should be doing exactly what they did, which is like taking what we've worked on together in the past and like applying it to something new and different. And they've always cut their own piece. And I think they've always done a good job of cutting their own piece. So I'm so happy to hear that. Yay.
Yeah.
Good for those girls.
What was the best thing you saw yesterday?
I'm going to say the best thing I saw yesterday was in my duo prelim. I did not take note of the gals' names, but they're doing a piece called Zinc, the Myth, the Legend, the Zebra, which is fun and upbeat. It's also a little bit sad. And the story, like several of the duos I saw yesterday, the story bounced between reality and some fantastical story element. Like there were 3 of them that did that. This is the one that did it the best. Even the fantasy elements felt rooted, and they felt like they supported the story that was happening IRL. And it was clean and polished, and the 2 people who were doing it were evenly matched duo interpreters, and clean movement and interesting movement. And so I would say that duo doing Zinc, the Myth, the Legend, the Zebra, which I know sounds like a crazy title, but it's good. It's apparently based off an actual child's life and writings. A child who unfortunately was diagnosed with leukemia. So it's part of like her coping mechanism to like create this story of this other world. And there was also some really good accent work in it, which is tough to find in teenagers, especially teenagers from Wisconsin.
Yeah.
Because the first step in learning any accent in Wisconsin is getting rid of your Wisconsin accent and then taking on somebody else's. And they did a really nice job. So I'm going to say they were the best thing I saw this week.
Good. Yeah. Also in Wisconsin, it's hard because there are a lot of people who are not exposed to very many accents. And if you're not exposed to them, it's hard to have like something to build from if you don't know necessarily what it is. So,
Malyssa, are you implying that Wisconsin is not a hot destination for international visitors?
We are not exactly a racial melting pot, no.
I guess I can cross the Visitors Bureau off our list of potential sponsors.
Hey!
So congratulations to everybody who competed at Oshkosh North, all the teams that were there. It was fun to see a bunch of people, and now it's really starting to feel like the season is kicking off, and that's fun. So
yeah, we're in the swing of it now.
We are. So since we're in the swing of it, let's start our actual plan for the season, shall we? As we revealed last week, our plan for this season is to go category by category through the WFCA categories that we are closest to and know most about, and to kind of break down all the elements of those categories. And so I did create a little bit of an outline for us to talk about these so that there's some structure and we kind of hit some of the same notes every week as we talk about things. So, excellent yawn.
Thank you.
I'm so glad I can see you. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to see how well structured that yawn was. I wouldn't know how bored you were as I'm talking.
It's not that I'm bored. It's just that I had coffee really early this morning and I already finished my tea. And I'm really bad at drinking on mic because I'm noisy. And so
you've done well so far.
Thank you. I was gonna change out of my water bottle into a cup so I wouldn't have to worry about the plastic. So I just had to pick up my water bottle in a very specific way.
No, it's going. Ladies and gentlemen, I've seen Malyssa take several drinks of water and you haven't heard it. She's really, this mic technique is on point.
I'm learning. It's only been how many years?
Yeah. So I thought, so we're going to get started with really 3 categories in the WFCA, but they're like, together. They're all like, to do 3 separate episodes on these would have been silly. So we are starting with prose, poetry, and then the category in Wisconsin that combines the 2, oil.
Yes.
Oral interpretation of literature, the acronym OIL. So I would love to hear your definition of prose, and then I can do the definition of poetry.
Okay. Well, it just so happens that in preparation for this, I pulled up what the WFCA has definitions of those categories as. So the WFCA defines prose as a selection from prose literature, including short stories, cuttings from novels, monologues, soliloquies, essays, or other nonfiction work centering on a specific theme or emotion to be interpreted. This is an interpretive category, not an acting category. For me, prose is an 8-minute presentation of a piece of literature centered, a single piece of literature centered around a singular emotion and or theme.
Yeah. And poetry is much the same, which is why we're talking about it in the same context, except it's a poem or a collection of poems, preferably a collection of poems that center around a theme and work well together. And then all of the same verbiage about being an interp category stays the same.
Yeah. And if you want to hear us talk about the difference between interp and acting, that episode already exists in our backlogs. We're not going to try to get too much into it when we're talking about this. Please go back and listen to that episode where we basically talk about it for, I think it ended up being something like almost an hour. So go back and check that out. We'll probably touch on it a little bit in this, but to hear us talk about it in depthly, that episode exists in the backlogs.
Spoiler alert, I'm going to talk about it. And then oral interpretation of literature for us is poetry and prose. It is a 10-minute presentation instead of an 8-minute presentation. And what we do here in Wisconsin is you will do one round of prose, and then the next round you will perform your poetry. And so everyone in the round is doing the same thing, but you alternate throughout the day. So in our typical 3-round structure, you will do prose, poetry, prose, or poetry, prose, poetry. And then the final round will be whichever one you've only done once.
Yeah.
So that again is why we're rolling this up into one episode rather than trying to address all 3 of these separately, because really the only thing about oil that's different is it's a little bit longer.
Yep.
So, we could get into why we think there's an oil when we already have prose and poetry, but
I mean, mostly because it's a nationals category.
Sure. So true. So that's the definition of those. I would love to know your personal experience with these categories. Did you ever perform in any of these 3?
Yeah. So I've talked about it on the podcast before, but I was a speech kid my first 3 years of forensics. And then my senior year, I was like, I want to do something different. And so I became an interpreter. And I did oil. I did a prose and a poetry and then transitioned them into oil for national qualifiers / state. I think I did oil at state too. So yeah, I have a little experience, only a year's worth. And oil is one of my favorite categories to coach. And I feel like it's a category that Ben and I have made one of our like strength categories at South. Yeah. Did you do oil or did you only ever do specifically just acting?
I don't think I ever did oil. I know I did prose, I think my sophomore or junior year. It was right when double entering was becoming in vogue.
Ooh.
I know. Imagine that. I did forensics when there were only single entry tournaments. And then every once in a while they do a double entry one. And I was like, I would like to expand beyond that. Like you, I did speech. For 3 of my 4 years. And so I wanted to just try something different. And so I did a tournament or 2 of prose.
Okay.
But
do you remember what your piece was?
I remember it was something from Stephen King that my coach gave me.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, I do not remember specifically what it was about. But on the coaching side, I guess my first experience coaching oil was my senior year. And I remember working with Vicky Gottsacker in the hotel room the day before state. And I forget if it was just like, you know, at that point in Sheboygan North's history, like we had done really well the year before at state. And so there was definitely some strategy in like where we were putting people and in what categories. And we were trying to spread the talent out. So I forget if like Vicky just had been doing prose or poetry and then like got thrust into oil for state because they wanted her high scores in that round instead of like trying to compete against the 3 other people doing prose or poetry. Or if she had to change a piece, something happened where like she hadn't really done this particular performance often or before. And so it was really like working with her and it was brand new. And I think it's fair to say nobody really had high expectations, but she was there to go get like higher scores. So like make sure you go out and get some 2s and 3s and that way it keeps our average up. Well, she ends up winning the thing. So I just like, I remember that as like my first instance of coaching oil is working with a fellow student in that capacity. And then a few years later, when I came back as a coach, I was working with Katie Henderson as a contestant. Very similar situation where she was in a group interp all year and her partners couldn't go to state. So she was doing oil for the first time at state, and I worked with her the night before, and she was in the final round at state. So I have a little bit of coaching cred when it comes to coaching interp, just a little bit. I haven't had a ton of kids do it since I was the head coach at North, but those who have seen, I would say mild success. I haven't had I haven't had state champions in oil.
Yeah, I think I've had kids break to finals at state. I don't remember their names specifically, and I've had a kid break at national at NCFLs in oil. But yeah, it's not our category. It's one we're pretty good at, but it's not like one of those things. But I really enjoy oil. And I know that there are plenty of people in the WFCA who sort of stick their nose up at prose and poetry. But for me, prose and poetry are a great way to introduce kids to forensics being a little bit different. Like, kids understand what a speech is and they understand what acting is, but like interp can be hard to understand because you're asking them to stand up there with a binder and emote in a way that like doesn't cross a line into acting, as some people believe. But I feel like it's a really great way to get a kid into forensics. And a lot of people will, when they first get a kid on a team who doesn't know what to do, they'll sort of just hand them prose or poetry and say, go forth.
Yeah.
So some people don't like it, but I feel like,
well, because everybody knows how to read out loud. It's easy. And this is one of our questions for later, but we may as well talk about now. Like, what are some of the myths about this category?
That it's easy.
I think that's the biggest myth, is that it's like, it's easy, or that it's, I don't want to say that it's not a good category for beginners, because it still is. You learn a lot from doing it, but it's not easy. So I would say if you come into prose or poetry and you don't understand forensics, it is not going to be easy to find success there. Prose and poetry are a great place, are an easy place to figure out how forensics works and what interp is like, but it's not an easy place to have success because the category is so broad. It's the category with the broadest definition of what qualifies as prose or poetry, like piece-wise. Because you can do fiction and nonfiction. You can do short stories and soliloquies and monologues. Like, there's so much that fits in there. So everyone's tastes going in as a judge are different. Everyone's tastes as a student going in are different. There are humorous pieces. There are dramatic pieces. There are pieces that are all in the middle. There are pieces that are informative. Like, because it is so broad, that's one of the things that makes it difficult. And it's the same in poetry, because poetry, so many things qualify as poetry. So because and there are so many preconceived notions of what poetry is. Exactly.
So because both of the genres are so expansive, it makes it difficult to set yourself up for success if you don't necessarily understand how to get there. You can't sort of walk in and be good at it.
Let's talk about the elements of a successful performance in these categories. So like you've touched on already, but choosing a piece can be very difficult. When you're working with a kid, what is your advice to them if they're going into any of these categories? If they need to pick a prose or a poetry piece, what's your advice on choosing that piece?
For me, we'll start with prose because it's the largest category for our association. For me, a good prose piece is a piece that tells a complete story in 8 minutes. That you have set up a scene that the audience can follow you through within 8 minutes. And that you are giving them something to care about in those 8 minutes. I don't necessarily mean that it has to be something like they have to like care intensely and has to like move them physically. They just have to want to listen to you for 8 minutes. And so you want to pick things that you know people care about and want to hear about for 8 minutes, because it's not. Some people are picking proses based off of things that they enjoy, which is great. And forensics should be something that brings you joy. But you also, if you're looking for success, it has to be something that you are enjoying and your audience is enjoying. Right. And I think that sometimes kids are coming in and they're bringing like their favorite book about something that they really care about, something sort of like a niche area of like young adult literature. And it can be really hard for your audience to lean into that universe with you. So I tend to believe that some of the best prose are short stories or story, like smaller stories that happen within larger novels. And yeah, that's for me, that's the first place to start, is making sure that you are telling a story within 8 minutes, and it's something that the audience can latch on to. Mm-hmm. Maybe that's better than caring, is that they can latch on to it. Yeah, that you can. I mean, we're going to, I'm sure, use this word a lot in these conversations, but you have to engage your audience. Yeah. Like that's what makes a good performance, no matter what the category is. Your audience needs to be engaged. And so as we have both had students do, they show up and, I want to do this, my favorite section of Lord of the Rings, or I want to do my favorite chapter from Harry Potter. And it's like, okay, I was like, but they're not self-contained stories. Sometimes you can get away with it if the story is such a part of the zeitgeist that everybody knows the story. And so you doing just this scene from the book works because everybody's familiar with it. But there are very, very few stories that are like that. For me, it's very helpful, though, to have a kid bring me that and be like, oh, now I see what you're into. Yeah. Let me show you this that might be a better fit. And yeah, absolutely. When it comes to prose, like my favorite source of prose pieces is short story collections. And I love a good collection of essays from a memoir. Yes. As well. I think those can be really successful prose pieces as well. I've never actually had a student try to do a monologue or a soliloquy in prose. Never tried it. I think I've done a soliloquy. I've never done a straight up monologue because they can be touchy rules wise for some people, because they'll say like where it qualifies. But I think I've done a the student chose to do a soliloquy. And it's worth mentioning at this point too, in Wisconsin, in both prose and poetry, you are allowed to do your own original work. So if you happen to have a student who's a really talented writer or poet, this is an opportunity for them to present their original work. Yes. I mean, being totally forthright, I think those students tend not to be as successful because they're going up against professional writers. But if you have a student who's looking for that way to be able to share their work with the world, this can be a way for them to do that. I would just manage their expectations as to whether or not they want to be successful on a competitive level versus just enjoying the opportunity to share their work. Yeah. And also you yourself can determine if they're like asked to read their work, obviously. And I have heard really good like self-authored poetry before specifically. I don't think I've ever heard prose that like jumped out at me, but I've definitely heard it. Self-authored poetry where I was like, dang. Yeah. So don't necessarily shy away from it. I don't want to like discourage coaches from allowing students to do it, but it might take a little bit more hands-on work. But it could be nice because you can edit it yourself and you can add things, and you might be able to help them turn their own stuff into something that works better for forensics. Yeah. So what do you think makes successful poetry performances? For me, it has to be a program. Yeah. I truly like I know that there are poetry pieces that exist that are long enough to be cut down to 8 minutes or fill a whole 8 minutes. But for me, always the best poetry pieces are poetry programs that there are different genres of poem around a different theme. So you can change up the pacing of it, because a lot of poetry is written to be sort of one note, and it can detract from a performance if a student gets into like an unfortunate rhythm. I don't know what other way to word that other than like, because I think people understand when I say when a student gets into the wrong kind of rhythm, when they're not crescendoing to anything. They've just brought you up to a level and you have to follow along with it for 8 minutes. And you're not taking any fun path. So for me, it's almost always going to be a program. And I have we have pieces in our repertoire that are single poems, but if you're going to do a single poem, it has to build and crescendo to be successful. And I feel like very few poems successfully do that when they are spoken aloud.
Yeah, for me, working with students on poetry is really it's a lesson in cadence, because cadence is one of the things that's necessary for it to be a poem. Spoken word poetry obviously stretches that the most. Free form poetry stretches that a lot as well. But they have a cadence, they have a rhythm. And the pitfall is falling into a repetitive rhythm. Yeah. But no successful song in the history of the world keeps the beat at the exact same tempo for the whole thing. Like, variety is the spice of life, no matter where you are. And in poetry, for me, like I said, it's a lesson in cadence. It's finding that rhythm, using it appropriately, doing exactly what you said, which is building, slowing down, using silence, playing with the rhythm, more so than letting the rhythm be the piece. So
also, just while we're talking about poetry, hey guys, slam poetry is not spoken, like all spoken word poetry. Like, all slam poetry is spoken word, but not all spoken word poetry is slam. So can we just stop referring to all slam or all spoken word poetry as slam? Like, I really get tired when judges are like, I don't really like slam poetry. And it's like, there's nothing slam about this. This is just originally spoken word. Like, slam poetry is sort of like more off the cuff. It's more improv and impromptu, and also tends to be cutting. Whereas just a poem written to be spoken aloud, to be spoken word, is not always slam poetry. I just wanted to slip that in there.
All right. Good for you.
Can.
Yeah,
this is our podcast. I'm gonna take a moment because I'm sick of reading that. We talked about this before. I seek out spoken word poetry specifically because it is written for how it sounds coming out of the mouth and off of the tongue. And so it already sets up students for success to be there already. So I do a lot of spoken word. And
not all poems are written, or not all poems are alike. Like you said, like, spoken word poetry is written to be spoken aloud. Some poems were not written to be spoken aloud. In fact, the very structure of them on the page is part of the art form. And sometimes they just don't translate into being read aloud, or they're not nearly as powerful when they're read aloud as they are read from the page. So don't try to make poetry something it's not, would be another thing I would tell people who are choosing a poetry piece.
Yes.
When you're practicing with kids in prose and poetry, what are some techniques you have found to be helpful?
Well, we do a lot of spoken word poetry. And so I will have a student, if I know that there's a video that exists, I will ask them to watch it, not because I want them to copy the performance, but I want them to understand artistic intent. In the same way that, like, if there is a movie adaptation of something, I'll have a kid watch that. Or if there's a recording from a moment in a play, I'll have them watch it, because artistic intent is very, like, just being someone from the theater, it's important to me. And someone who has written her own spoken word poetry and stuff.
She will not let you read it. Don't ask.
Don't ask. But letting them hear how it sounds and like the pacing that it can sound good in doesn't mean that that's how it can translate to forensics, because some spoken word poetry is very, very quick and very, very fast, and that doesn't translate to forensics well. But then also like having students break down their poetry and sort of taking it, like picking just a stanza one day and like, let's play around with this stanza and let's figure out what we think the best pacing for this is. And also, like, because I am who I am, figuring out where can we potentially work in some binder tech here to make it more interesting. Is there a moment in the piece that we feel we might be on a downbeat and we need to bring something more interesting into it? Let's figure out what we can do with the binder. And prose is just so hard because of how many different genres you can do. I feel like it really depends on the piece, but sort of just making sure that they actually care about what they're doing. Because I feel like so often kids in prose don't care at all.
So I want to respond to your poetry thing, and then I want to talk about prose for a little bit. Okay. First of all, I totally agree. Kids who are doing spoken word poetry need to watch and listen to a lot of spoken word poetry. You need to understand the cadence of what it is so that you can perform it correctly. But exactly like you said, it does not mean mimic a performance. We talked about that for a whole episode last year. Copying a performance almost never works. So don't do it. It makes me think of Sean from last year, who had a pretty successful poetry piece. He did a program of poetry. It was 2 spoken word poems around a theme. And for us, the issue was they were very similar in how they were delivered by the original artist. And so to get up and do 2 poems that sound exactly alike, boring. So don't be afraid, as I encourage Sean to do, to watch how the original artist does it, but find your own way.
Yeah.
You know, like
it's artistic intent versus performer interpretation.
Correct. And not all writers are great performers. So if we all just did our prose pieces by finding an author, like a YouTube video of an author doing a reading of their own piece, it'd be terrible.
It'd be so boring.
Like some people are really great at writing, but they're not actors. And that's the second thing I'm going to talk about with prose, which is despite what the WFCA rules say, despite what so many people talk about, reading poetry and prose aloud is acting. It's not getting on a stage. It's not wearing costumes. It's not adding a lot of a physical movement. You're not creating a setting, using the space around you as we do in the solo acting categories. But embodying the voice of the writer and engaging an audience, that's still acting. And the thing I do the most with my students who are in all interp categories, but especially prose and poetry, is we talk about who the writer is. What's their perspective? If they're writing from their own perspective, like often spoken word poets do, or people who've written a memoir do, like, who is that person? Why do they have this point of view that they have? What would they have been feeling as they're telling this story from their own life? And then try to adopt some of that feeling and emote. Like, that, it's all still acting, guys, even if we're not. Yeah, we're going to get into this much deeper, but it's still acting. And if they're not writing from their own perspective, if they're writing from a character's perspective, even more so, like, who is this character? Where are they set in time and place? Like, are they writing about someone they love? You can't not act like you love the person they're writing about. If they're in a scary situation, you can't not act like you're scared, or it would be boring.
I think that when judges write, when they're like judging interp and they say, oh, this is too acting, this is too acty, that is a very lazy way of trying to tell a student they're being over the top or they're laying it on too thick. Very rare. Like, if a student is doing a great job in interpretation, they act in. They just are.
It should.
But if they're over the top and it's too thick and it's too much, or like they're snapping in place and that sort of thing, like, then then find a more specific way to say that. Don't tell them that they're being too acty. Tell them they're being over the top. Yeah. That their energy levels aren't correct or something. Like, very rarely is it actually that it's too it's never that it's too acty. It's just that when they say it's acting, and it's a lazy judge critique.
Right. Because what you want is it to feel authentic. You know, like, you didn't write this most of the time. In two of these categories, you can present original work. But even if you're not the person who wrote it, you want to feel like the person who did. You want to feel like you're listening to somebody telling you a story that they care about and believe in. And that, again, like, that's all acting. It's all acting. And it's the ones who don't do it. And sometimes it is hard to articulate why this doesn't feel good. It's because it doesn't feel sincere. And the strange thing about what we do is oftentimes, in order for something to feel sincere, you have to fake it.
Yep.
So that's when working with kids a lot, when it comes to prepping for prose and poetry, it's a lot of character development. And that's, we go through the same process. I would go through the same questions, that I would go through if I was working with a student on preparing a monologue or a solo series piece, or just to prepare to play a character on stage. It's the same process. You got to understand the world and the background and the motivations of the person talking. Otherwise, it's going to sound boring. So,
and then those are the pieces that people think of, not the good ones. They think of the ones where it's just someone reading something aloud when they're like, oh, I don't really like judging prose. It's like, but prose can be great.
Prose, yeah. Like all things. It's so like, I don't like judging bad prose. I don't like judging bad poetry, but I love it when it's great. I love all of these categories when they're great.
See, for me, poetry is kind of like pizza. Even bad poetry is still poetry for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
But let's talk about some like amazing prose or poetry or oil that we have seen that are really great examples of, to us, what makes a really great, those really great memorable prose or poetry / oil performances. Because this is something that you brought up and I have to think of. So I'm going to let you go first.
Oh, no.
Because the only one I can think of is my own student. And that seems
why is that bad? That's not bad. That's great. I was lucky enough at NSDA to judge a prose final round 4 or 5 years ago. And for me, it's one of the things that helped form my opinions about coaching it moving forward. Because again, it felt, without all of the movement that we would associate with acting, it felt like they were acting. And so, and not just in their voice, in their facial expressions, in their posture, how they held themselves. And that was all very important. And so I would say, getting to see that final round of a supplementary category at Nationals a few years ago is some of the best prose I have seen. There were funny pieces, and those were young people who knew how to tell a joke, how to let a joke land, how to be humorous. There were serious pieces where they were able to imbue the performance with enough heart and thoughtfulness that it was affecting to the audience. So that was some really great prose and poetry, or some prose at that point in time. I'm trying to think of like the best poetry performance I've ever seen. And the reality is I haven't judged a lot of poetry. I haven't
That's
judged.
Fair.
I do recall around from a couple years ago, and I know I talked about this on the podcast at the time, there was a girl just doing Beyonce songs as poetry. And as much as like the description of that sounds like it wouldn't work, she was a really good performer, and she performed the hell out of those Beyonce songs in a style that was appropriate for poetry. And so I guess I would say that's one of the better poetry performances I've ever seen, not only because it was really good in and of itself, but it subverted my expectations, and it made me rethink a long held position that it's not worth doing songs as poetry. How about you?
Well, former student and now good friend Chris Harmelink came to our team as a freshman and brought this novel that she had loved, and we cut it into a prose piece, and she ended up winning state as a freshman in prose, and she was just so good. She was just so good.
Very
and
talented.
Continued to be amazing in prose and poetry. Like interp was her thing. She was also great at speech, and she did acting, and she basically was a triple threat, but interp was always her wheelhouse, and she just 100% understood how to exist in the box that we have made interp while still sort of pushing on the walls. She was very good at that. And she was also always willing and down to try different kinds of poetry styles, not just spoken word. So she's just one of the greatest like interp performers I've ever seen. Like, this is my 15th year in the forensics world, 11th year coaching. Like, she just still goes down as one of the best interpreters I've ever had the pleasure of working with or just watching.
I still viscerally remember her performance of Wit in Solo Serious. Like, it's one of those ones that just comes to mind as like a student being able to embody a character that they shouldn't be able to do so well. She was like supernaturally good at acting and interp. It's a shame she's so unfortunate looking.
I know, right? Not a
JK,
nearly 6 foot
gorgeous.
tall red-haired goddess. Ugh. And it's just like also kind and like wonderful and like is my hippie sister. But yeah, I'm trying to think of other like more notable, because I haven't judged a ton of prose and poetry just because I always have students in it. And it's not, I can't like think of like just one that's not my own.
Well, that's okay. That's okay. Now you know the questions coming for future episodes.
Yeah. Now I'll have to know. But I think that the performances that are memorable are the ones that are people who are like that Beyonce one, where people are stepping into the boundaries of what prose and poetry are, and then are trying to gently guide you outside of those lines. Yeah. And subverting your expectations.
And that being said, that's something that you and I enjoy. And we fully know that there are judges out there who don't like that. And that's an opinion that is valid. And people who do that have to know that like they're going to run into judges like us who love it, and they're going to run into judges who aren't like us, who might ding them for trying to step outside the box a little bit. But this is the nature of what we do. It's subjective. Yeah. You're going to run into people who like it. You're going to run into people who don't. I would like to think that more often than not, you're going to run into people who appreciate what you've done, rather than those who try to penalize you for not being exactly what they think the category should be. I hope that's what kids see. I hope that's what you and I are doing with this podcast, is creating more people who learn to appreciate stuff that's outside the box versus get mad about it.
Yeah.
So
don't get mad. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, with that, that is our summary of prose, poetry, and oral interpretation of literature. Oil. It is different. I'm just going to go ahead and say it's different than those people who might be listening from outside Wisconsin. It is different than POI. It is different than a program of oral interpretation, which we will talk about in a future episode. So hold your breath. It is not that. Okay, breathe, girl, breathe. And we will talk about that in the future. I want feedback. What did we not talk about? Like, tell us your best performances that you've seen of these. I want to know how you coach really successful prose, poetry, and oil pieces, how you find really great prose, poetry, and oil pieces. Let's get a conversation going. And if you guys give us some really good tips, we will happily share them with our Forensics Faces audience. Well,
thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening, everybody. We're going to wrap it up and let you get back to your day. And we're going to get back to our day, which includes eating lunch. I am excited to eat some food. And
I'm just going to eat more cake.
And I'm going to be jealous that Melyssa's eating cake. All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye. Forensic Spaces is proudly produced in Wisconsin, the birthplace of the National Forensics League. Our theme song was written and performed by JJ Hameister.
If you're a fan of Forensic Spaces, the best way to support the podcast is to leave a 5-star rating and review on iTunes. You can get in touch with Malyssa and me by emailing listen@forensicspaces.com.
You can also find links to all our social media accounts and online merch store by visiting forensicspaces.com.
I'm Kirt.
And I'm Malyssa, encouraging you to listen,
think,
and speak.
Preferably in that order.
Also, if my cat wakes up and starts screaming, I'm so sorry. I tried to tire him out and now he's sleeping, and hopefully that works because he has been f***ing ridiculous the last 20 hours.
What does a cat scream sound like?
Literally. No. Yeah.
Don't ever do that again.
It's great.